America has lost a close friend, the world has lost a great statesman, and mankind has lost a champion of peace.
A small group of Egyptian soldiers, firing from a truck in a military parade outside Cairo today, assassinated President Anwar Sadat. The reviewing stand on which the Egyptian leader, other officials, and many dignitaries were seated was raked with bullets and hit by grenades. It all happened in a matter of seconds. When it was over, at least a dozen persons, perhaps many more, and Anwar Sadat were dead.
From around the world and from CBS News in Washington, this is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
Good evening. It was a day of brutal contrast in a suburb of Cairo. Anwar Sadat, dressed in a beribboned military uniform, reviewed his troops, the strength behind his rule. Those troops were commemorating a war in which Egypt claimed victory, a war that led to peace with Israel. And some of those Egyptian troops who enabled President Sadat to make his bold bid for peace turned on him. Mitchell Krauss was there.
Sadat's last day began as he met his generals at the Defense Ministry. Then he was cheered along the motorcade route to the parade grounds for the annual celebration of Egypt's partial victory in the 1973 war with Israel. He laid the traditional wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier and settled down to watch the display of Egypt's military might, much of it now purchased from the United States. Flanked by his Vice President, Hosni Mubarak, and Defense Minister Mohammed Abu Ghazala, Sadat saluted as the various units passed in review. Then, just after the tanks and anti-tank units passed, while a formation of jets roared overhead, there was a puff of smoke and a flash in front of the reviewing stand, followed by a hail of gunfire. Pandemonium ensued. Ambassadors, military attachés, spectators fled the scene, leaving the dead and wounded behind. It took several minutes for the impact of what had happened to sink in. Amid a heap of bodies, Sadat lay gravely wounded. Vice President Mubarak was led away. Defense Minister Abu Ghazala, blood on his face, directed the seizure of the attackers. Though there is no precise information available yet, it's believed Sadat's personal secretary and his photographer were killed, and a number of other Egyptians were wounded. 3 American military personnel watching the parade were slightly wounded. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Charles Lunny, stationed in Washington, D.C., Air Force Captain Christopher Ryan, stationed in Stuttgart, and Marine Major Gerald Agenbrod, an aide to the commander of the U.S. Rapid Deployment Force, stationed at Medill Air Force Base in Florida. Sadat was rushed to the Mahdi Military Hospital in a suburb of Cairo, the hospital where the Shah of Iran spent his last days. He died 2 hours later of multiple wounds. The funeral is set for Saturday. A little-known group calling itself the Independent Organization for the Liberation of Egypt, based in Beirut and led by a former chief of staff of the Egyptian army, has claimed responsibility for the attack. 3 of the 6 attackers were killed at the assassination site. The people of Egypt did not learn of the assassination officially until Vice President Mubarak spoke on radio and television in early evening. The Vice President said it was Allah's will that Sadat should die on the day of the October victory, and he pledged Egypt would continue in the tradition of peace established by Sadat. For the moment, though, the President pro tem is Sufi Abu Taleb, the Speaker of the People's Assembly, although Mubarak is all but certain to win election as president 60 days from now, as called for in the Egyptian constitution. It's past midnight now, and Cairo is reported calm. But if the wave of emotion that followed Gamal Abdel Nasser's death 11 years ago is repeated, that calm may not last long. Mitchell Krauss, CBS News, Cairo.
As in Cairo, the day in official Washington was marked by confusion over the events 5,600 miles away. More on this from Bill Plant at the White House.
An administration spokesman said the president did not know for certain that Sadat was dead until the official announcement was carried on Cairo television. 35 minutes later, Mr. Reagan appeared at the north portico of the White House.
Today, the people of the United States join with the people of Egypt and all those who long for a better world in mourning the death of Anwar Sadat. His death today, an act of infamy cowardly infamy fills us with horror.
White House officials said tonight there were no plans for Mr. Reagan to attend the funeral, but emphasized that the decision was not final. White House spokesman said that U.S. military units in the Middle East had been informed of events and told to exercise prudent precaution, a sort of low-level alert. The administration went out of its way to note that it was pleased by Vice President Mubarak's statement of support for the Camp David Accords, an indication that senior U.S. officials hope there will be no changes in Egyptian policy. That feeling was underscored at a 45-minute meeting of the president and his national security advisors late today. Their consensus reportedly was that as long as Mubarak takes over, things should work out. In the words of one senior official, Mubarak is a very impressive guy. Bill Plant, CBS News, the White House.
Other American public figures reacting to the assassination denounced the death of President Sadat, praised him as a courageous leader, and speculated about the future of that troubled region.
The death of President Sadat was a great tragedy. President Sadat was a world leader of great vision, tremendous courage. The United States has lost a very, very good friend.
The essence of Sadat, in my acquaintance with him, was his courage in going to the heart of a problem and to ignore the minor calculations with which most statesmen occupy themselves.
The courage and wisdom which he exhibited in making the trip to Jerusalem and getting the peace process moving forward and breaking through the psychological barrier, that was a magnificent action on his part.
But he counted upon the United States to move the peace process forward. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have peace overnight, but you've got to be actively engaged in pushing it forward. That we have not done in the last 2.5 years. Had we done so, perhaps Sadat might have been alive today.
He was the friend of the common people everywhere who yearned for peace. His only real enemy, the enemy that struck him down, was the common scourge of human history, the forces of killing and war and hatred.
We've shared great events and achievements, and we've shared tragedies as well. I don't know of anyone who's ever contributed more toward peace on earth in my lifetime, perhaps this century, than has President Sadat.
Mitchell Krauss mentioned the 3 wounded Americans earlier. The Pentagon has more fully identified those 3 American military observers who were slightly wounded in today's attack. They are Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Charles D. Loney, 42, of Austin, Texas, shot in the shoulder. Air Force Captain Christopher Ryan, 34, of Sacramento, California, shot in the foot. And Marine Major Gerald R. Agenbrod, 36, of Bruno, Idaho, shot in the leg. The Pentagon said that in the aftermath of the assassination, U.S. forces in the Middle East, quote, are taking prudent precautions as they would in any unusual situation. Those forces include about 4,000 Marines aboard ships of the 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean. In addition, there are 4 American naval ships in the Persian Gulf, 6 in the Arabian Sea, and some 18 others scattered around the Indian Ocean.